Good evening. Here we are. Got some people here. Kingdom Centric Way, Brother Stephen. How's it going? Braden and Stephen and Braden and Braden, and that's who we got. All right. Cool. Thank you for being here, guys. Do you hear me okay? Is everything all right? We are out here home alone tonight. Okay. Everybody, you guys hear me? Hello, Devin. All right. Think you guys can hear me okay. So, we're going to respond to Jay Dyer. Jay Dyer put out a video about he is responding to what's his name, Andrew Wilson, who is another Orthodox apologist, and Andrew Wilson is arguing against pacifism, against Christian pacifism. And let's see if I can find it here. And Jay Dyer is sort of coming in and backing up Andrew Wilson and, critiquing Christian pacifism and basically saying that it's silly, it's not biblical, it's not the teaching of the church, it is low tier, as Jay Dyer often says. And he makes a bunch of arguments that I think are not good. So, before we start that, let me just see what's going on here. Tan the donkey that speaketh. Tan, how's it going? Great name. That's a great name. Who else? Whoops. Who else? Hope for Heaven is coming. Hello. Thank you so much for joining us. God bless you, my friend. Yeah, so anyway, yeah, that's a great name, right? Tan the donkey that speaketh. It's funny. It's even better if you know Tan. He has a very self-deprecating way about him that I really like. Chris Sadowski, how you doing? Great to have you back. Thank you for joining us. Really appreciate you being here and having the good conversations that you like to have here. All right, so yeah, as I said, responding to Jay Dyer and his arguments against Christian pacifism. I'll talk about this a little bit as we get going here, but I don't like the word pacifism. I don't like the phrase Christian pacifism. I don't think there's anything passive about Christian nonviolence. I think it is actually very active, and it's something that soldiers of Jesus engage in as warfare. It's not, it's not something that's weak or passive. Okay, CCM Seeker. I think I know that. I think I remember that name. Who do I know you, CCM Seeker? All right. Here we go. Let's I'll come back to the comments after we do this, get through this thing. It's a 23-minute video. Maybe I should do it on maybe 1.25, speed, so it goes by a little bit faster. But all right, let's share my screen. All right. Now let's just just do a quick sound check, a quick sound test here, just to make absolutely sure, because I'm just kind of paranoid. Make sure you can hear this.
Christianity is not a pacifist religion, and
everybody hear that okay? It's Chris. Oh, Chris, of course, Chris. Yeah, I'm looking forward to having you on as a guest after we get through this. Looking forward to what you have to say. Thanks for being here. All right, so I assume you guys hear me all right. No one's saying that you can't hear me. I really shouldn't have to do this. I should know that you can hear me without having to ask if you can hear me, but I'm just sort of, I've had audio problems before, and just a little paranoid that I might get through this thing and you guys couldn't hear the whole time, and I didn't know because I can't see the screen. So can somebody give me a thumbs up that you did hear the YouTube video? You were able to hear that? Makes it more interactive. Okay, it sounds good. Okay, the sound is good. Okay, good. All right, well, here we go. Let's put it on 1.25.
Lindsay is calling him a Marcionist or Marcionite or something. Just wondering if you had seen it and if you had a take on what.
Well, yeah, we were going to cover the trigonometry discussion because Kai reached out to me and said that Andrew's discussion was one of the best that he's heard in terms of conveying to people in the political sphere how you can't really have a worldview, or you can't really do politics without having a worldview, and that every position kind of has an underlying paradigm or worldview. So we were going to play that clip, but I didn't know that Lindsay said that. But I'm not surprised, because James Lindsay is an absolute idiot when it comes to any of these topics, and we can see that if he's saying that Andrew's position of kind of if the position that the state has a duty to Christianity or to God, that's like the opposite of Marcionism.
Yeah, I don't even really understand like what he's trying to say. Like I skimmed through it because he's just so verbose and he's got me blocked, so it's not like I can reply. But I was just like, Marcionism, like how is this a Marcion?
This would be the opposite of Marcionism, which would show that he doesn't know what he's talking about. So let's see what he says. He says, it's mind-boggling. I'm not arguing that Christianity should be pacifist. Andrew Wilson gives the example of selling your cloak to buy a sword from the Gospel of Luke. Well, that's actually been used many times to show that Jesus isn't pacifist. I'm an agnostic. He exegetes this wrong. Like, why are we going to listen to some atheist dude exegeting scripture? The point of the story is that Jesus knows he's going to be taken by the Romans. It's not to fight. Well, it is self-defense, though. Jesus says in the next sentence that he's done speaking to his disciples. He's doing it so that he will be taken with the fulfillment of prophecy. Yeah, but none of that shows that it's not self-defense still. Jesus' disciples said they already had 2 swords, and they said it is enough. Fighting off Romans who are there to keep the law? No. For looking for an armed band of transgressors? Yes. It's not just speculation. The swords are not for fighting or fighting back. Well, even still, like, this is just nitpicking, because self-defense itself is biblical, and we have a long tradition of this. The Old Testament teaches that self-defense is biblical. You even have a duty to, as a man, defend your wife and kids, and you have to put your life on the line. In fact, when I was married in the church, we had, oaths that we say, will you give your life for her? Well, is that not talking about self-defense? I mean, that's crazy. So James Lindsay has no idea what he's talking about with just overall Christian ethics and moral and the history of the church, right? So he goes on to say, Peter draws the sword. Jesus rebukes him for it. His disciples weren't armed to fight back. I think the point, though, is that even though Jesus knew, and they knew they were not going to have an armed insurrection, the principle of having the swords shows us that Jesus is not opposed to self-defense. In other words, the state itself having the ability to execute those who are worthy of the death penalty, a la Romans 13, that itself is a form of self-defense, right? The state executing the death penalty is self-defense. And there's also individual self-defense. So it's the principle of being able to have weapons in self-defense, even though, of course, Jesus wasn't saying that take these swords, we're going to go overthrow the Romans. That's the zealot position, but it still shows a principle of self-defense.
Well, it sounds to me like, because James Lindsay thinks that Christian nationalism is like a Nazi movement.
Yeah, he thinks it's a psyop, which is ridiculous because it's his position that's actually the psyop.
Yeah, and what Andrew did brilliantly, I'm glad you're going to review the trigonometry thing, because he argues for it. Christian nationalism from his view is not this idea that we're going to have an armed insurrection and take over the government. We're going to fight a new crusade. That's not what he's saying at all. He says what you were saying earlier, which is that as Christians, from our worldview, we are using our Christian worldview to determine morality, which is how you figure out what laws you're going to have and how you're going to govern your society, what is socially acceptable and not, and all those sorts of things. And he did a great job of breaking down Constantine's like liberal presuppositions, which are the same ones that James Lindsay holds. So of course I knew that's why he's upset about it, but he's acting like Andrew is out here calling for like an armed crusade or an armed insurrection to overthrow the US government or something, which is
they're doing but you know what's funny is that did you see earlier in the show? So Ruslan and Gavin Ortlund are implying similar types of things. They're saying that ortho bros are now dangerous and dark things are coming and they're going to be hyped up. And Ortlund said today, these people are extremists. Of course, he doesn't say who he's talking about. He's obviously talking about us and they're dangerous and all this kind of stuff. When in reality, none of us are ever calling for violence. We're talking about the principle of self-defense and the Christian doctrine of the state. And these people are liars and they repeat what sounds like an SPLC script. So I'm not surprised that James Lindsay repeats similar types of scripts. James Lindsay is in an open relationship with his wife and has been for a long time. He's a complete phony. And that's why he absolutely refused 4 different times an offer to do a public debate.
Yeah, I've offered to debate him on feminism multiple times because he gets a whole bunch of that wrong and insists that feminism is not the same thing as egalitarianism, and I've challenged him on that and his whole liberal ethos, and all he does is block me and say that I'm some kind of pick me or whatever. He does that whole thing. So
yeah, I mean, and I tried, of course, again, here's another example where people say, oh, you're being mean. No, I tried being very, very friendly with James Lindsay for several years, actually. We went on 2 or 3 podcasts together. We had good conversations. In fact, I was even at an event where we had a 3-way debate between me, him, and whoever that fat Calvinist pastor is. I forget his name. Me and that fat Calvinist guy were just going at it like hardcore. And Lindsay was there just kind of laughing and kind of stayed out of it. But, we had a 3-way discussion on whether or not America and Americanism are what Christianity was actually trying to promote, right? Because you have these Calvinist guys who think that in this situation, they were saying, oh, Nick Fuentes is the face of the woke right that is going to take down, America and change the Constitution. And then that led into a debate about where I was arguing, I don't agree with Nick on everything, but I was arguing, well, actually, Nick's not wrong in principle in saying that the church and state have a role of helping to guide society together. And there's no such thing as this idea of a secular state or the Enlightenment Freemasonic idea of the separation of church and state like Roger Williams taught, right? And that just blows these people's minds, right? They absolutely lose it. And they will immediately call you, everything in the book. So let's play his response here.
This idea of
okay, maybe actually, you know what? Let's just look at a little bit of this clip that he's watching here.
The Christian pacifism and Christians being pussies. I don't know where that came from.
Britain, I think.
Boy, that was never.
So what about the teachings of Jesus Christ?
Now this is so low tier.
All right, so there's a lot of stuff, that Jay just rattled off there and a lot of things to respond to. And I probably won't get to everything that everyone caught, that could be responded to. But I don't know who this James Lindsay guy is. I'm not sure what his position is on everything. Apparently he's an atheist or agnostic or something. It seems that Jay Dyer may have made a little bit of an ad hominem, move here where he seems to attack Lindsay for being an atheist and being in an open relationship with his wife. Obviously, none of that means that he's wrong about this or that he did not exegete Luke 22 correctly. He could be spot on this issue, and also an atheist and in an open relationship with his wife. So that was all just totally irrelevant. And Jay did not exegete the passage, Luke 22, which came up a couple times. He just asserted that it, supports self-defense. So let's let's look at that passage real quick. And I looked at this, not too long ago. Sorry if it's a little redundant, but maybe there's some people who've never heard this. So Jay makes the case that that self-defense is biblical, and didn't really, give a good argument for that. He just and he's gonna give some arguments. But here we're looking at Luke 22 in the New American Bible Revised Edition. There's a reason why I'm reading it from this Bible. It's a Catholic Bible. And let's just look at the passage here. So, Jesus says, the heading they have here is Instructions for the Time of Crisis. He said to them, "When I sent you forth without a money bag or a sack or sandals, were you in need of anything?" "No, nothing," they replied. He said to them, "But now one who has a money bag should take it, and likewise a sack, and one who does not have a sword should sell his cloak and buy one. For I tell you that this scripture must be fulfilled in me, namely, he was counted among the wicked. And indeed, what is written about me is coming to fulfillment." They said, "Look, Lord, look, there are 2 swords here." But he replied, "It is enough." So Jay and many Protestants, believe that they use this passage as, support for self-defense. They think Jesus is teaching a principle of self-defense here, which just doesn't make sense for a number of reasons. One reason is that Jesus has already commanded us to love our enemies and pray for those who persecute us. It goes on to say to do good to those who are our enemies, and to do good to those who abuse us. In Luke chapter 6, he tells us to turn the other cheek if we're punched in the face. There's no command to go ahead and fight back after the second or third or fourth time that you're punched in the face. And so it's very awkward for someone to hold the position that here Jesus is saying, I want you to arm yourselves with swords for self-defense, because clearly the time that he's telling them to prepare for is a time of persecution. It's not a time of just, hey, you guys might, while you're out there on the mission, what if some people come to rob you, and it's got nothing to do with you being Christians. It's got nothing to do with your message. They're just coming to rob you. Just in case that happens, get some swords. Of course not. That would be a random, out of nowhere, detour in the conversation. He's talking about the time of persecution that's coming. They're going to face hardships because of their faith in him. And so if he is telling them to arm themselves for self-defense against their persecutors, that's very hard to reconcile with Matthew chapter 5, where he tells them to love their enemies and pray for those who persecute them, and to do good to their enemies, Luke 6. So he tells you, for him to say, love your enemies, pray for them, those who persecute you, do good to them in one passage, and then to come and say, okay, get some swords and, stick a sword in your enemies or your persecutors, is not like, that doesn't work. Jesus will go on to disarm Peter later that very night. And he says, whoever takes the sword will die by the sword, which is about the strongest warning possible that he could give to his disciples, not to take the sword. He doesn't say whoever lives by the sword. He says whoever takes the sword. And so you can be sure Peter never took up another sword again. after that night. And another problem is that we see in the book of Acts, there's plenty of opportunity for the church to take up swords in self-defense. They've got more than enough people to do so. They've got, probably 10,000 people in the church or something like that, or more maybe, when the persecution starts. And they know from the Old Testament that God can take out a huge army with just a couple hundred guys, but the swords never come out. They never defend themselves. They scatter, they go to prison, they die, they get martyred. So if Jesus was arming the church for self-defense here in Luke 22, where were those swords in the book of Acts? Thirdly, where were the swords in the first 3 centuries of Christianity? That's a problem that Jay doesn't, I don't know if he doesn't realize what the church taught in the first 3 centuries or what, but he's very well educated on a number of issues. I can't imagine that he just has no idea what people like Justin Martyr and Irenaeus and Clement of Alexandria and Origen and Tertullian and Tatian and Athenagoras and Lactantius and Cyprian and all these people had to say about this. I can't imagine he doesn't know what the apostolic tradition has to say about this. So, maybe he doesn't know, or maybe he knows and he's just, explained that away the same way, Orthodox people often have to explain away what the church said about images in that period of time. Anyway, so what's going on here in Luke 22? If Jesus is not arming his disciples for self-defense, then what is going on? Well, he says, sell your cloak and buy a sword. Why? For I tell you that this scripture must be fulfilled in me. Namely, he was counted among the wicked. And he quotes Isaiah chapter 53. So Jesus connects the swords to the fulfillment of prophecy. And it sounds like he doesn't connect it to self-defense. He doesn't say, go sell your cloak and buy a sword so that you can defend yourselves. But he says you could take it that way, if you want to, but he doesn't explicitly say that. He connects it to the fulfilling of this prophecy that he's going to be numbered among the transgressors, or counted among the wicked. Now, one perfectly reasonable, legitimate interpretation of the passage is the one that this man, James Lindsay, whoever he is, seems to have offered in his blog there, that Jesus wants some swords present in order to help bring about the fulfillment of the prophecy that he is going to be numbered among the transgressors. Well, the presence of swords there that night give his enemies something to accuse him of, reason to consider him a transgressor, or to accuse him to the Romans, or something like that. It doesn't make sense that Jesus is arming the disciples for self-defense, because notice he says, the one who does not have a sword should sell his cloak and buy one. So anybody present listening to Jesus who does not have a sword, his instructions are to go and sell their cloak and buy a sword. So this is a problem for Jay's interpretation, because there are only 2 swords present, right? They bring out 2 swords among at least 12 people. And so if Jesus really literally wants them to not only sell their cloak, but buy a sword, then it doesn't make sense that he says it is enough, or that's enough. 2 swords is not enough if he wants whoever doesn't have a sword to go and get one, right? What he would say if he literally is arming them for self-defense is he would say, okay, 2 swords is a good start. There's at least 10 more of you. You 10 go take your cloaks, sell them, take the money that you get from your cloaks, get a sword, come back, and that'll be a good start. Maybe that'll be enough. Even that would not be enough, to defend them against the persecution that's coming. But 2 swords is certainly not enough. However, 2 swords is enough to help bring about the fulfillment of prophecy. And so, it makes some sense when you give it some thought and think about, really think about the passage and what it says and what it doesn't say. How do we make sense of this, But that's not the interpretation that I prefer. The one that I like is that Jesus is using a figure of speech when he says, sell your cloak and buy a sword. He's using figurative speech like we often do in English. He doesn't intend for these people to literally go and sell their cloak, take the money, and buy a sword. That wouldn't make any practical sense. They're going to need their cloaks. They're going to need their cloaks more than they're going to need any swords, even if he does want them armed for self-defense. If he wanted them armed for self-defense, there's other ways for them to acquire a sword without having to sell their cloak. So, the idea here is that Jesus is using a figure of speech to indicate that things are about to heat up, things are about to get really serious. And he uses this figure of speech, sell your cloak and buy a sword, which would be similar to us saying, the stuff's about to hit the fan, or something like that. A bomb's about to go off. Like we use this kind of language all the time, and people know intuitively. That doesn't mean that a bomb is literally about to go off. That means something bad's about to happen. Get ready, or the stuff's about to hit the fan. You're not looking for a fan somewhere, for some feces to hit it. You understand something bad's about to happen. It's time to bring out the big guns. That doesn't mean literally bring out 2 large pistols or something like that. But the disciples hear this figure of speech, and they're still in the mindset that Jesus is, the kind of Messiah who's going to deliver them from Rome. And they take him too literally, and they bring out these 2 swords, which would have been, machete-sized, kind of big dagger kind of things. And Jesus says, enough, or that's enough, or it is enough. Now look at the footnote here in the NABRE. It says, it is enough. The farewell discourse ends abruptly with these words of Jesus spoken to the disciples when they take literally what was intended as figurative language about being prepared to face the world's hostility. So, okay, this is a very, very reasonable interpretation. It makes sense. It brings all of Jesus' teachings into harmony. He's not contradicting what he said in the Sermon on the Mount. This is why there are no swords in the book of Acts. This is why there are no swords in the first 3 centuries of Christianity. Everything fits, everything works. And if it feels awkward to you, consider the awkwardness of, Jay's interpretation, and why that doesn't fit with the totality of Jesus' teaching, his example, and the historic position of the church for the first 3 centuries. Just a couple other things to mention here before we go on with the video. Jay says there's a long tradition of self-defense. He's going to come back to that later on. Actually, so maybe I'll leave that for later. He says that self-defense is biblical. If all we had was the Old Testament, absolutely, self-defense would be biblical, as would polygamy or polygyny, divorce and remarriage, and a number of other things, that were permitted or commanded in under the old covenant. Circumcision would be perfectly biblical. Anything else you can find in the law of Moses would be perfectly biblical. But unfortunately for Jay's position, we have the new covenant, we have the New Testament, where Jesus brings in a number of new teachings that would have been quite shocking to the disciples, as his teaching on marriage was, and stuff that they had never heard before. And he was bringing them into something new, something different. Certain things in the law of Moses that had served their purpose, like circumcision and a lot of the regulations in the Torah, those things were no longer necessary. Those are taken away. And a number of critical moral areas, he raises the expectations substantially and calls us to something that the Jews had never been called to before. So it is biblical. Non-violence is biblical when you come into the New Testament, and your mindset is, okay, I want to obey whatever Jesus says. I want to follow his example. I want to be like him and the apostles. He says you have a duty to defend your wife and kids. I don't know where in the New Testament he's getting that from. There's no passage in the New Testament that teaches that. The example of Jesus and the apostles certainly don't indicate that. I think what a man has a duty, a Christian man's duty, is to shepherd his wife and children's souls, and to make sure that he sets an example for them that is in line with the example of Jesus, and that he helps them to put their hope not in this world, not in making sure that we're okay now in this world and that nothing happens to us here, but that they put their hope in the world to come. That's the issue, that he helps them to think the way Jesus wants us to think. Don't be afraid of the guy who can kill your body and after that can't do anything else to you. Fear the one who can cast you into hell after he's killed you. And so what a man needs to do is shepherd his wife and children's souls and point them to Jesus and to the narrow and difficult path that Jesus walked and carved out for us. Because if he shows them an example of fighting or killing your enemies to protect yourself or to protect loved ones, then he is actually leading them away from Jesus. He's showing them an example that's not in line with how Christ lived when he was on this earth. And so he's actually more dangerous to them than the person who's coming to merely hurt their bodies or something like that. He mentions Romans 13. Maybe we'll talk about that more later. And then we watched that short clip from Andrew Wilson, where he made a claim about Christian pacifism, and he said there's nothing like in the Bible or in church history that says that Christians should be, and he used a word that I don't want to repeat, but that basically that Christians are not supposed to be weak, pansies, pushovers, people who are just sort of fearful and afraid, and this is just like, this is sort of a tactic that is a little silly, to sort of call this principle of non-resistance, weak, it's just not true. Like, there's nothing weak about how Jesus responded to his enemies. There's nothing weak about how the apostles and their disciples responded to persecution. There's nothing weak about nonviolence. If you are doing it in obedience to Christ, and you are doing it in an effort to get through to your enemies and to be pleasing to God and to be like lambs among wolves voluntarily, This is something that when you get into the mindset that of Jesus and the apostles, like suffering in this way, if it ever happens, is something you think of as a gift. It's not something that you try to manufacture that you want to happen to you. You're not looking for it and trying to make it happen. But if it comes to you, it's like, okay, Lord, give me the courage to be like Jesus. Give me the strength to walk in the footsteps of Jesus and the apostles, like Paul said, who considered his life of no value to him. And they were ready to die at the hands of their enemies for the sake of the gospel. And for the example that would show to the world, which had a huge impact. We know that there were a lot of Romans who became Christians because they saw the strength of the martyrs, their courage, and we need to cultivate that same thing in ourselves, so that we can show the world that same kind of example, that same kind of love for our enemies, and willingness to lay down our lives where we could defend ourselves if we wanted to, but in obedience to Christ, we relinquish that. And so, I heard a great story. I heard a great story once about a soldier. I think it was in World War II. It was a soldier who I think was maybe part of one of the Churches of Christ, or maybe he was an Anabaptist or something like that. And, or maybe he had become a soldier and then so I can't remember exactly the details of the story, but, he'd been drafted and had decided that he couldn't take up arms. And basically his life was in danger. He was being threatened with execution, for treason. And he was basically given an ultimatum, if you don't change your mind on this and get ready to take up arms, then, we're gonna kill you. We're gonna put you to death for treason. And he basically responded and said, look, I'm ready to die right now. Like they said, get ready or we'll put you to death tomorrow. You got a day to think about it. And he said, I'm ready to die right now. Like there's no reason to wait for tomorrow. Like, if you're gonna do that, let's just do it now. It was just kind of a story that stuck in my mind as a picture of the strength that Jesus gives to us if we will just obey what he says and not try to squirm out of it and explain it away. And, okay, let's keep going here. And Jay's about to make some more comments and arguments, and then we'll come back to it and respond.
Here, right? Like, obviously, if you're familiar with church history, we have so many warrior saints. You have countless kings that were saints. The Old Testament is full of people like David, heroes of the faith, or Samson. Even if you read Hebrews 11, when Paul cites heroes of the faith, he also includes people who put to flight the wars and the foreigners and those of the enemy. So there's this idea that now that Jesus came, everything is now, quote, spiritual. That's actually the Marcionite position. The idea that God has nothing to do with the state. That's the Roger Williams position that we outlined last night and today, which is the Gavin Ortland. Again, Al Mohler, the president of the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, invites on the CIA guys and the consultants and the counterintelligence people and pushes CIA lines that we've got to be doing espionage in other countries. And it's biblical because we got to fight Putin. So he just repeats the normie CIA stuff. And even if you think that's legitimate, that's night and day. Imagine Roger Williams, their spiritual forefather, saying that we got to have spies in other countries for the superstate, for the American empire. It's just retarded. It's the opposite of what the whole Baptist tradition was about, namely disestablishmentarianism. The idea there is no role that the state has to God. There's a separation, not just of church and state, but God from state. That's Roger Williams.
Which ones do you want to dive into?
Well, I was raised as Catholic, so I'm not as well versed in scripture as you. When he was on the cross, forgive.
He doesn't know his own Catholic teaching for the last 1,600 years in the West is the same position that the state has a duty to God. The state can execute criminals. You have a right to sell. What Christian country has forbade the basic principles of self-defense. Now, you could say maybe the class system in Britain didn't allow people to have like swords and stuff like that at various times. But in general, the principle of Christian nations in the history of the church has allowed for self-defense. And again, the idea of having a Christian army that defends against invaders and foreigners, there's nothing, that's just taking the self-defense principle and applying it on a larger scale. And imagine actually arguing that, no, actually you have no right to self-defense. Remember Seraphim Aldea, that Marxist pacifist libtard that tries to argue against all the Orthodox converts in America he says are satanic? That's what he said. He said, I went to all of the American parishes and churches and I didn't find one true convert. These were converts of the devil. Remember him saying that? Just outrageous, just total insane levels of prelest. The dude lives on an island under the protection of a state. Is he going to say that when the Muslims come into his little Scottish island or wherever he is? What's he going to say when the Muslims show up there? Is he going to appeal to pacifism? No, he's living under the benefits of a state that protects him, at least for this present time, against foreign invaders. Now, all of Europe is being invaded intentionally, by design, by oligarchs, bringing in zillions of infinity Muslims and others. So they're going to learn what their open borders pacifism, fake-ass Christianity is actually going to get them when the Muslims come in, as they are doing right now. So all of these libtards who push this absolute made-up pacifist idea, it doesn't exist in church history. And they'll pick out a monastic saint talking about vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. That's monastic life.
Okay, so a number of things to talk about there. He made the comment about this this Catholic man on the right side of the screen that he's watching there, who doesn't seem to to be as well versed in scripture or whatever. That's what he said. He said, he doesn't know the position of his own church, the Catholic Church, their position for the last 1600 years. It's interesting that he can't say for the last 2000 years. It doesn't matter if like that's what we need to be able to say. We need to be able to say the tradition for the last 2000 years. It doesn't matter if you can trace it back to the 4th century or the 3rd century. Like, you have to be able to get back to the apostles. And if something is not in line with the teaching and example of Jesus, and you try to trace it back to his era, and you hit a wall in the 4th century, you got a big problem. That whatever that is that you're believing, it's as good as Mormonism. It's as good as Jehovah's Witness doctrines. It doesn't matter if it started in the 1800s or if it started in the 300s or the 400s. If it didn't start in the 100s, if you can't find it anywhere in, the 1st, 2nd, 3rd century, then you got a big problem. And so, yeah, 1600 years of tradition is totally irrelevant. He attacks I don't know, some Scottish guy that he's critiquing, who made some comment about most Christians not being real converts, and I guess it was because of their they're not being willing to love their enemies like Jesus did. I don't know who that guy is that Jay is critiquing, but he made an argument that how easy it is for someone to critique just war, or to say we shouldn't go to war or take up arms. Meanwhile, you're living in a country that is protecting you because it has a military and it protects its borders. Like, what does that have to do with what Jesus did, what Jesus said? This man that Jay is critiquing, what control does he have over the Scottish military or the British military? That's got nothing to do with this. The fact that the United States provides some measure of protection for people like me has nothing to do with whether or not Jesus commanded his disciples to practice nonviolence. So it's just completely irrelevant, and one thing that I think Jay should consider is the Levitical priests in the Old Covenant. They were not allowed to go to war, and they were under the protection of the armies of Israel. But it wouldn't be right to, criticize them because they were, abstaining from war while being protected by the armies of Israel. In a similar way, Christians are called to love their enemies, and they are called to fight a much more important battle than the ones that the armies of the nations of the world engage in. God is certainly at work, in those earthly conflicts like World War I and World War II. Was God at work there, and using that for His plan? Of course, but the fact is that He calls His people to be a kingdom of priests and to follow Christ and to engage in a different battle that has much higher stakes, is much more important, and requires our full attention, and and requires us to be ready to lay down our lives voluntarily without any defense. We are supposed to be ready to die for our enemies, for our earthly enemies, at their hands, even though we could have defended ourselves against them and potentially killed them. So there's nothing weak about it. There's nothing hypocritical about it. The question is, what did Jesus say? What did Jesus do? Am I going to be His disciple? Am I going to be a student of His teaching and His example? That's the relevant question here. Okay, let's keep going.
That's not the state. And Nicaea already said in its canons, there's nothing antithetical to being a Christian and being a soldier. So that you understand, we've already had this debate. This debate happened in the 2nd and 3rd century because you had some groups amongst the church saying, like Roger Williams and the Baptists, saying you can't have anything to do with the state because the state is the beast and it's Satan. Okay, we had this low tier Baptist level debate in the 2nd and 3rd century. And Nicaea already ruled on this, that there's nothing antithetical to being a soldier and being a Christian. And one of the arguments they use is John the Baptist saying to the soldiers say, John, what must we do to be right with God? And he says, don't mistreat people and don't take people's tax money or tax them more than they deserve. That was Nicaea's proof text. Well, obviously, if God didn't believe in self-defense or armies, John the Baptist would have said, you need to leave the army. You must.
Yeah, I think that just reveals a lack of understanding on Jay's part of like how radical of a change Jesus initiated, when He brought in the new covenant, brought in the kingdom of God, brought in the law of Christ. John the Baptist was an Old Testament prophet who was saying these things before Jesus began teaching and giving His new commands and instructions. And but notice that John the Baptist, he doesn't tell them, yeah, you can or cannot continue killing people. He doesn't say anything about that. And the church of the first couple centuries didn't necessarily require soldiers to leave the army, just like John the Baptist didn't require soldiers to leave the army. But what they required, and this is in the apostolic tradition, I think chapter 16, is that if someone was a soldier and they wanted to become a Christian, they had to agree that they would never use the sword again. And they also could not swear any oaths. If they were not willing to comply with that, then they could not be baptized. So they didn't make them leave the army, but they did require them to commit never to use the sword again. Apostolic tradition, chapter 16, I believe. So there's nothing in the John the Baptist passage that is a problem here. You've got to look at what Jesus says and look at what he does and look at what the early church teaches about this. And Jay, seems to think that this is something that was settled in the 2nd and 3rd century. I'm not exactly sure why he says that. Maybe he's aware of some literature that I'm not aware of, but to my knowledge, in the 2nd and 3rd century, the Christian apologists, the Christian teachers, the people who were representing the church were quite clear that killing was off the table for Christians. Fighting and self-defense, like these things were not appropriate for disciples of Jesus, because it's not how Jesus was, and it's not in line with what he commanded. Okay, let's keep going.
Must leave it. This is so low tier. Like, it's just so silly. I mean, imagine thinking in the Middle Ages that when you have basically a Christian society, whether it's Byzantium or whether it's, a French village in the 1100s, like imagine thinking that, oh, you're not supposed to have any kind of borders or walls or defense. It's just retarded. Like, everyone would just think you're insane. Like, what are you talking about? We have a castle because we have freaking looters and invading armies that come through here. So we're not supposed to have it's just retarded. Like, people are so dumb and living in some fantasy world because we've grown up in this peaceful post-World War II environment where they just think that, oh, everybody's cool and liberal. No, the Somalians coming into your neighborhoods, the Muslims coming into your neighborhood, they don't have the same, they don't care about civic nationalism and the Constitution and all this bullshit. They don't care about that. And you're going to find.
Yeah. So he makes it sound like people who are, committed to non-resistance are living in some kind of fantasy world. It's just like this is not an argument, this is not relevant. And it's not a fantasy. I mean, there have been times in church history where Christians have had to practice non-resistance on a large scale. And it's not like it's something we can't do. We absolutely can do it. And in the first 3 centuries, that practice of the church is part of what caused the church to grow so rapidly. So, yeah, if Muslims come to invade a country, or if some foreign nation comes to invade some other nation, what would happen if that nation, let's just, in theory, if that nation was truly a Christian nation, in the sense that everyone there is ready to die for Jesus in the way he did, praying for their enemies rather than trying to kill them in self-defense, what would happen? What would happen when those Muslims arrived expecting resistance, expecting violent resistance, and instead they found a nation of people ready to welcome them, offer them something to eat, offer them a place to stay, pray for them. Perhaps a lot of them would attack and start murdering people, and perhaps a lot of those Christian people would run and flee, and a lot of them would die. But probably a lot of those Muslim people would see that and be like, that is not what I was expecting. What on earth do these people have? Like, what's going on here? And you can be sure that God would be at work, and that just as in the first 3 centuries, where the Romans saw that courage and that devotion to Jesus and that commitment to walking in his footsteps, and a lot of them became Christians as a result, you would have massive numbers of Muslims repent and turn to the true God. Or maybe God would do something miraculous to protect them. I don't know. But if we just respond like any Muslim nation or any atheist, group of people, or any nation of people that thinks like the world, if we just respond like they would, well, yeah, I mean, why would Muslims see that and be like, wow, these people are so peculiar, so unusual. What do they have? No, they're not going to think that. It's just what they're expecting. It's what they would do. Okay, let's move on here.
Find out that they don't care about that. You're already finding out. All the people in Britain are begging us in our country to help and figure out how to not let that happen here. Why? Why would they be begging us? If the Muslims are all going to be cool, dude. Everybody's going to be cool, bro. We'll all team up together.
Them, Lord, for they know not what they do.
Of course. And you should forgive people. I absolutely agree with that. I may forgive a man who attempted to rape my wife, but I'm going to kill him in the attempt, right? Like,
that's actually correct. It is not murder to practice self-defense. This is so basic, and people should know this. Does anybody, I mean, do you guys not realize that? What do you think would happen if somebody tried to get into the Vatican and do something to Pope Leo? What do you think would happen? I think Pope Leo would just lay there and let the butt buddies do whatever they want with him. Actually, in the case of the Pope, they might, right? But in theory, no. In practice, probably not, right? I mean, imagine somebody breaking into the Moscow Patriarchate, right? You think they would try to do, oh, you could just let him be pacifist, be pacifist. They would immediately assassinate him. He would be immediately taken out. Somebody rushes the Pope-mobile. What do you think those 16 security guards are going to do? They're going to take him out immediately. Duh. The papacy practices self-defense. It has a giant Leonine wall around the papacy. It's a city-state. You can't just walk in there. You think
Yeah, the question is not what is the Pope going to do, or what is the Swiss Guard going to do, or what would the Patriarch of Moscow and his bodyguards or whatever do if they were attacked. The question is, what would Jesus and the apostles do? What were they like? And are we going to be like them in the world, or are we going to be like the Pope and the Patriarch? I mean, if the Pope and the Patriarch of Moscow are our example, yeah, well, then we can do all kinds of things that we all know without having to think about it. Jesus and the apostles would want nothing to do with. But that's not the call. The call is not to live like the Pope or the Patriarch of Moscow. So this is all just completely irrelevant. It means nothing. And, and Andrew Wilson here said something interesting. He said, yeah, I'll forgive him, but I'm still going to kill him. It's sort of this idea that, you hear Catholics and Protestants and Orthodox, all of them think like this. And it's the idea is that I can forgive him. I can have sort of kindness in my heart towards him while I still fight him and kill him. So I'm still obeying Jesus because I'm still loving him. I'm still loving this person in my heart while I just do what I need to do, practically speaking. And I think we'll end there. There's more to the video, but a lot of what Jay goes on to say is a little bit repetitive, and he's got a few more points, but I don't think anything that's really too important to deal with. So let's end on this this point of forgive them while you kill them. Have good thoughts and feelings towards them while you fight them and kill them if necessary. Let's just look at what Jesus says here and why that doesn't work, and then we'll wrap this up. And Matthew 5. Love your enemies. What does Jesus mean by love your enemies? Well, first of all, he says, offer no resistance to one who is evil. And he gives a number of examples of situations in which to put this principle into practice. And he gives a number of other examples in Luke 6, which we'll look at in a minute. But these are all, he gives us actions. Turn the other cheek, hand over your tunic, hand over your cloak, go 2 miles. He's commanding a certain action in response to evil that's being done to you. He's not commanding good feelings. He's not commanding good thoughts. He's commanding us to do something in response to evil that's being done to us. And this, I don't think, is very helpful. It says teaching about retaliation. This is not a teaching about retaliation, although it does it does have implications for that. Of course, we shouldn't retaliate. But Jesus says, do not resist, offer no resistance to one who is evil. And that goes a lot further than do not retaliate against one who is evil. If it was do not retaliate against one who is evil, that's sort of more like don't take revenge against someone who has already done something evil to you. But when Jesus says do not resist the one who is evil, that indicates that you're not going to try to stop someone who is about to do something evil to you. It hasn't happened yet. He's going to do it, and you're not going to try to stop him with violence. Obviously, Jesus fled in certain cases. He resisted with his words. He resisted evil with the truth, but he never resisted with violence. We have to be like that. So this goes way beyond non-retaliation. And then we come down into this passage here, love of enemies. You've heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. He makes his sun rise on the bad and the good, and causes rain to fall on the just and the unjust. So Jesus is telling us, he gives us some action, something he wants us to do. Pray for them, not just feel good about them, right? Not just have good thoughts, but pray for them. And then he gives the example of his heavenly Father, who doesn't just think good thoughts, right? But he makes his sun rise on the bad and the good. He causes rain to fall on the just and the unjust. Jesus is commanding us to be like his Father in that we actually do good. We do good to our enemies. We don't just feel good about them, but he's commanding loving action towards them. And so if you forgive your enemy in your heart, or if you convince yourself that you're forgiving your enemy in your heart while you kill them, you have failed to love them in the way Jesus is commanding here. You have failed to do good to them. You have not shown them love with your actions, right? What you think in your mind, how you feel in your heart, that's irrelevant to what Jesus is talking about in this. Is it important? Of course. We're not even allowed to be angry with our enemies, let alone kill them. But here in this passage, Jesus is commanding loving action. And that's completely irreconcilable with what Andrew Wilson has said. And then this is more strong in Luke 6, and then we'll be finished. In Luke 6, Jesus says, but to you who hear, I say, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who mistreat you. To the one who strikes you on the cheek, offer the other one as well. From the person who takes your cloak, do not withhold even your tunic. Give to everyone who asks of you. And from the one who takes what is yours, do not demand it back. Do to others as you would have them do to you. For if you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who do good to you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners do the same. And so do you see what Jesus is saying here? He's not commanding, again, good feelings. He's commanding us to do something here in response to our enemies, in response to violent attack. If someone punches you in the face, Jesus wants us to do good to them. And so let's not deceive ourselves and say, oh yeah, I can love my enemies even if I have to fight or kill them. That's completely out of line with what Jesus commanded and with what he did. So don't be tricked by this widespread, popular teaching, popular way of looking at things. That's, it's in the Protestant, Orthodox, and Catholic Church. It's not of Christ. It's not the teaching of Jesus. It's not the teaching of the apostolic church. And if you look at what the teachers of the first couple centuries had to say about this, you'll see that. All right. Let's go. Let's see what's going on here. All right. Got a bunch of comments here. Okay. Hello, Tiny. Yep. Thanks for that comment. The fact that Jesus and the disciples never fought to defend Israel from Roman oppression should tell us something. Amen. Really sad that the Orthodox and Catholics have become in this respect. Yeah, and I think what Jay Dyer is communicating here is actually not the position of the Orthodox Church dogmatically. They don't embrace just war theory. It's kind of weird. Like I think dogmatically, their position is that if anyone kills as a soldier, they're barred from communion for, I think, a year. And yet they have military chaplains, and it's just so odd. They sort of say this is never right. It's never good to kill. But sometimes you just got to do what you got to do, bite the bullet, abstain. You can't take communion for a while, but you did the right thing in a sense. It's very, weird thing there. Okay. All right. Well, I guess we'll just, there's a bunch of comments here. Okay. If anybody made a comment that you want to be someone to respond to, please just post it again. All right, so I'll put the link in the thing, and now there's somebody in particular. His name is Chris, not Chris Sadowski, but another Chris. Although Chris Sadowski, you are more than welcome to come on, but there's another Chris who I want to make sure we get him on the thing here. So let's just make sure that happens. All right, here we go. Here is the link. There's the link. I don't have I guess I don't have too much time here.
Yo, can you hear me?
I can hear you. How you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing all right. Chris, where are you at, man? We want to talk to you. Sadowski too, man. I'd love to talk to him. He seems like he's got a lot in his head and a lot on his heart, and it'd be a good conversation.
Yeah, that would be great. I have a friend named Chris who is a very interesting guy. He's
he's at work.
Go
ahead. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, he's a very interesting guy, and he texted me earlier and asked if he could come on, and I said absolutely, and I'm hoping that he can come on.
Yeah. It's been a really good stream. You said a lot of good things there. I was kind of commenting near the beginning where I've actually seen a lot of Jay Dyer's content, and boy, if he manages to see this is going to be crazy. I'll tell you that. But
yeah, I don't think he'd
anyway.
respond though. I don't think he would respond even if he does, because it's not, enough views. Okay, here's Chris.
Hey, buddy.
Chris.
Hey,
Hey,
Chris.
how you doing?
Good. How are you?
Doing good.
Before you get into what Jay Dyer was saying, could you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm pretty much just interested in studying Christianity from a, historical point of view, and interested in theology. I'm really interested in like early Greco-Roman religion. Yeah, so
Okay, and what is your worldview?
So I don't consider myself an atheist at all. I'm not a Christian, but I do. I am open to metaphysical ideas and spiritual, truths and things like that. So,
Okay.
but I am not a Christian.
Yeah, and you are unusually you have educated yourself on early Christianity to an unusual degree, especially for someone who's not a Christian, and you often are perplexed at how Christians get away from some of this stuff Jesus said about non-resistance and love for enemies. So
yeah.
Go ahead. What do you want to tell us?
Well, no, yeah, to say the least. I think, being a non-Christian, when you read the New Testament, the one thing that you can come away, in my view, for sure, is the nonviolent ethics of Jesus. Like, it screams off the page at every turn.
Right.
It's not always, absolutely in your face in every verse, but the totality of it. But more so when you just study as you thoroughly kind of reviewed. I mean, not quote wise, but the early church was, and they didn't agree on lots of things, but the one thing they did agree on was this ethic of Jesus. I've not found any writing that goes against the nonviolent prohibition against killing.
Yeah. And nothing.
Found any, not one verse. You would think if there was any, substantial number of Christians, or there was any movement in that direction, there would be at least some writing that we have, but we have nothing. In fact, if you go to like the Dictionary of Early Christian Beliefs by David Burkott, you won't find one quote under war or under anything to do with, capital punishment.
Right.
You won't find one quote that varies from the nonviolent prohibition on killing. That's lockstep.
Yeah. I've checked out that book as well.
Yeah, it's just
Berceu's a pretty good guy. He's very listed up on all his early church writings and stuff, and he's been in that field for a long time.
So, but then what got me interested was, where did it all change, right? Mm-hmm. And I think I texted you, Thomas, about kind of what fascinated me was when I stumbled upon the writings of Eusebius. Mm-hmm. And in the demonstration of the gospel, I came across the part where he talks about the two types of Christians.
Right.
And he describes, right, that there. Have you read that? Did you look that up?
I think you sent me some quotes.
Yeah.
But yeah, feel free to read them, or even put them on, if you want to share your screen or whatever, you're welcome to.
Yeah. I don't have it on I would if I had it.
All right, maybe
I can basically summarize what he says. Okay. So I can read it. I've got it right here, actually.
Okay.
It's from the Demonstration of the Gospel, which is a writing from Eusebius of Caesarea. And it's probably around the year, they estimate like 312 or something, where he's writing this. So, we're talking about, again, much later. So he goes on to say, and his disciples, accommodating their teaching to the minds of the people according to the master's will, delivered on the one hand to those who were able to receive it, the teaching given by the perfect master to those who rose above human nature, while on the other side of the teaching, which they considered was suitable to men still in the world of passion and needing treatment, they accommodated to the weakness of the majority and handed over to them to keep sometimes in writing and sometimes by unwritten ordinances to be observed by them. 2 ways of life were thus given by the law of Christ to his church. So then it goes on to explain the 2 ways of life of the Christian. So the first one is the monastic life, celibacy, the ascetic life, the nonviolent, which what we would know is the typical Roman Catholic priestly kind of life.
Right.
But then he goes on to talk about the second type of Christian who can engage in the affairs of the world, can be engaged in business, can bear children, can engage in even orchestrating and giving orders in war and things like that. So I just found that fascinating. To me, that kind of starts to tell where potentially the Roman Catholic, what started to become Roman Catholicism, started organizing, and for practical reasons kind of started that shift. And then also there's a book called A History of the Amish by Stephen Nolt, and he even cites, I'll read a little quick excerpt from that kind of touches on that too. So this is kind of talking about the time of the Reformation, but it pertains to that kind of the same idea of Eusebius. But he writes, moreover, because the church routinely baptized all infants, it automatically included all citizens among its members. In practical terms, this meant that the church had to adjust its moral expectations downward, seeking a lowest common denominator to support its inclusive character. Virtually everyone was a member of the church, regardless of their commitment or interest. The church could not expect the rigorous ethics of Christ's Sermon on the Mount from those who were nominally Christian simply because they were citizens. Instead, it settled for expedient personal and social ethics, and Jesus's teachings were often disregarded in the face of political realities. In Catholic lands, monks and nuns still aspired to biblical counsels of perfection, but reformers such as Luther and Zwingli had done away with those religious orders. So it's interesting. It's kind of, although this isn't the time of Eusebius he's talking about, it's still the Reformation carried the same idea that there's going to be 2 classes of Christians, right? And
yeah, that's
are going to fall into the second order and not really follow the ethics of Jesus. And that's where I think Christians are right now.
Yeah. And I think monasticism kind of exploded in the 4th century because certain people who wanted things to remain as they had been saw all this compromise and they said, I don't want anything to do with this. And they went off into the desert.
Yeah.
And not that there wasn't any compromise in the 3rd century or, 2nd century, but obviously that compromise that started coming in at some point along the way there increased tremendously in the 4th century for obvious reasons. And it's not hard to see why. It's interesting. It's very interesting, like what Eusebius was saying there, that it's like certain things they loosened up on, like the nonviolence and abstaining from war thing, but then kind of like becoming more strict when it comes to certain other things that the Bible gave more leniency on, like having bishops be married, with children, and stuff like that. Anyway.
Well, yeah, but like he puts the childbearing into the second category. Okay. That's the category of those who can live within the world and.
Right. Yeah. But I'm saying the Bible puts that in the category of bishops, like bishops are supposed to be someone who's, got a wife and kids and he's managing his household well. And, it seems like at some point, they say no, priests need to be celibate. And like you said, rearing children, that's for the second class, citizens or whatever. And it's just odd.
It was kind of like a split, and it was almost like they had to make some clear boundaries between the two, but it was.
So have you been having any conversations lately with any Christians who, about this issue? And
yeah, I've had quite a few, and it's the typical.
Can you tell us about
a lot of what Jay Dyer brings up? So that Luke passage, that's. I don't know that that's cited by every single one. Sometimes I don't get that cited to me, but one thing about that Luke 22 passage, I would recommend everyone, if you go to the Michael Heiser site, there's an excellent podcast on that verse. Really? It's called The Sword and the Servant, and it's David Burnett. And he exegetes the entire. In fact, you can print out the entire conversation.
Okay.
And look it over, and he gives a really thorough analysis of all the surrounding verses. And so essentially his takeaway is similar as you said, that, it was to fulfill the prophecy. The transgressors were likely the disciples. But the reason he analyzes the surrounding verses is it's a pattern of the disciples lacking faith, essentially. It's just another because it's sandwiched by like a set of 3, right? Because prior to that is when Peter denies Jesus. Peter denies him after. That's after the Luke 22 verses. But before that is when Jesus rebukes Peter, right, for not understanding the things of God, right, and things of man. Yeah. So,
wow.
And then he kind of gets into like the fact that they had the, he told them the beginning not to bring these items, and then he says, well, if you have them, bring them. But they were never supposed to have them to begin with, right?
Yeah, I mean,
it's really all showing a lack of faith. They're really just not faithful in even what Jesus was saying. And I don't remember if he has this interpretation, but I take when he says, sell your cloak and buy a sword. Clearly, they didn't buy a sword. They had them, right? They immediately produced 2 swords, which again, I think fits the pattern of they lacked the faith. They had these swords on them, which weren't really like long swords. They were, You know, they already had them. They already didn't trust in what Jesus was saying, and now produce these weapons, right? Because the verse doesn't make sense if they actually went out and obtained these two swords. They immediately show them, right?
Yeah, and it's
kind of calling them out, like, look, you didn't even. Not only did you not take these things that I said to not take, right? Whoever has them, take them now, right? Well, of course you have them. You weren't faithful enough to not have them. Now go ahead and sell your cloak and get a sword up. You already have the swords too, right? It's like
yeah. And I love the point about how it's sandwiched with these passages where they're not
the real
faithful,
point
they're
he
not
tries
getting
to
it.
make.
Yeah, and that makes so much sense, and I never thought about that before. And it makes it even more awkward to think that this is a passage about arming them for self-defense, which is just not in line with the flow of the text. You know, it's like, wow.
And so, and absolutely, if again you understand what Luke's doing, you know, it's he's absolutely throwing it in the face of, you know.
Wow, I gotta go check out that. Yeah,
they lacked the faith, right?
What's the website again? Michael Heiser's website.
It's called The Sword and the Servant.
Okay.
The Sword and the Servant, and it's Michael Heiser. It's his website, but it's David Burnett who's like the guest who comes on.
All right. To my friends here in South Carolina who love listening to Michael Heiser, take note of that. The Sword and the Servant, David Burnett. We're going to have to watch that together.
And you can print too. Like I said, if you want to, you can print the whole transcript, which is cool. And I think actually he might have the notes attached. I think at one point I printed like his notes about so it's pretty good. It's not like a quick once over. It's not as in-depth as Jay Dyer's analysis, but it's you know.
Yeah, I got you. So okay, wow. Well, you just gave me some serious insight there on that passage.
So that's good.
I'm gonna have to make a video
for that.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, the first 300 years are lockstep in this position. I don't know, like you made a good point. I really don't know if Jay Dyer or the people that I talk to, the other Christians, they seem to honestly believe the position that they're stating, but I feel like it's more of a cultural thing. They're just have been taught, it's been ingrained in them for so long that like it just can't possibly be true that Jesus would say that, you know, if you are attacked, you don't have the right to defend yourself, or, you know, I think they look at it like it's like from practical. I think it's so ingrained that it just wouldn't be a practical or moral stance.
Yeah.
To do that, because they bring up every reason why, and it's kind of similar to like, you know, what Jay Dyer brought up, like all these scenarios that, you know.
Yeah, I think talking to a lot of conservative Christians about this issue is sort of like talking to a lot of people today who've grown up in, you know, liberal cultural setting about, you know, what the Bible says about sexuality. Like the idea that sex is only for a man and a woman is just so odd. You know, it's like, and then it's only for marriage is so strange to them. It's so different from what they're used to hearing and how they've been conditioned by their culture. They just can't wrap their minds around it, and the conversation often goes nowhere. Talking to Christians about this stuff is very much like that. They're so conditioned by their culture, especially American culture and just war theory and all that stuff. And now you just read them this stuff that Jesus said, and you show them what he did, and it just doesn't matter. It's so different from what they're used to. They just, it's such a shocking and difficult transition to make at that point,
no, and I think that, those who are even interested enough to, like, let's say they go and Google a passage, we know that you can quickly get a satisfactory interpretation that'll get them through the day, right? There's plenty of sites that regurgitate right back an interpretation that they can live with, well, when Jesus said, turn the other cheek, it really was more of, if someone insults you, it's these kind of things, and it's just, it doesn't, but when you tell them, like, or I get, well, this was only like in a legal sense, and then sometimes it's flipped. I even hear the exact opposite, that this is only, in a personal sense, but then you can counter, but Jesus also said, don't take, your fellow believer to court, settle before you, right? So, like, he even preaches against that. He even cuts off the, like, he even says, don't go to court, because in fact you're going to be judging the angels, right? Like, you can't solve your petty, I think that's Paul, right? He says, you can't solve your petty disagreements between.
Yeah, if I'm not even allowed to take a Christian brother to court, how could we think that Paul would think that we could go to war against them, as they are in the Orthodox Church, Ukraine and Russia, Orthodox Christians killing each other over these things? It's just like, it's so obvious. But when you're conditioned, you just can't see it. A certain kind of spiritual blindness comes over you, and it's amazing to me that people who are not in the church, people like yourself who are not believers, can read the text of the New Testament. They can see very clearly what it says. Like, they might not be willing to do it. They might not be willing to obey what it says because they're not convinced that this stuff's really true. But you don't have to convince them. It's obvious what Jesus did and what he said, and but Orthodox, Catholic, Protestant folks, it's like, it's very difficult to get them to even open up to it.
And, one point I've tried to make, and of course, this isn't necessarily the strongest argument, but if they apply Jesus's ethics the way they're interpreting, there's nothing radical about that. Like, that's, any pagan philosopher on that age would have agreed with the way they interpret it, like what's radical about, you can kill someone in self-defense, but you try to not kill people on a regular basis, or you try to not cause injury or harm. But if you're put to the test, or you're threatened, well, of course you can kill them if you need to, like that kind of, like, it's just, there's nothing radical about that. It would just reduce Jesus's ethics to like any other. There would be nothing.
Yeah, it's not.
In fact, it's almost indistinguishable from the Old Testament.
Yeah, and what a lot of Muslims, what a lot of Muslims would do, and and it's just by definition, it is not a narrow and difficult path that only a few find.
There's nothing radical about that. That's in fact, our regular secular laws just fall neatly within that context. It's you could really just say the secular laws essentially are following Jesus's ethics. Right? I mean,
Thomas, did you pin the live stream link?
I I don't know how to do that, but let me just put it in there again. Let me just put it in there again.
We got some ortho bros. It's good
Oh
time.
boy.
First time I've been on here where we had some detractors. It's interesting.
Yeah, this would be the first time.
Please come and talk to us so we can discuss.
I just put the link in the stream. Now I think I can have.
Adriatic Scarecrow 228 says Orthodoxy has lived through over 1,000 years of constant war and oppression from Muslims. This is something pampered Americans can't understand.
Pampered.
You have a point. We haven't seen war in this country in a long time, and if it ever comes, we're going to be woefully unprepared for sure.
But I would argue that's, again, completely irrelevant.
Yeah, it's not a question of whether we're pampered. I get the point, Adriatics. I get the point that you're making, and sure, Americans today are some of the softest people in history. A lot of them anyway. But the question is not about whether we're pampered or, the question is, what did Jesus command? And again, like what he's calling us to is not something weak. It's not something for the faint of heart. He's calling us to be ready to die and to suffer at the hands of our enemies willingly, if necessary, while we pray for them. There's nothing weak about that. That's not something for the pampered. That's something for people who are strengthened by the Holy Spirit and ready to lay their lives down in the way that their master did.
Yeah,
can't be
the way I
prepared
read
for it
it
any other way.
The way I read it is a radical faith. It's not supposed to be practical, and I think that's where I see the most confusion is, well, it's not practical, or it doesn't seem to make sense in, it wouldn't aid you in survival. It wouldn't, like, all these things that are not the point of the ethics. It's total devotion to God or to Jesus, right?
Yeah. We got some more comments coming in. If it's their life or my life, I'm choosing mine. Chris, I understand that way of thinking, but that's not the way Jesus shows us, and it's clearly not what the apostles were like. We have to be, he wants us to get in the mindset where we are ready to die for our enemies. We're trying to rescue them out of slavery to the devil and sin. And the kind of love that Jesus displayed is the kind of thing that can that can break that hold in people's lives. Okay, let's see. There's another thing here. Adriatics, I don't think you'd really be ready to do that. Orthodox, again, have lived through this reality for over 1,000 years. Well, I mean, even if it turns out that I'm not ready to do that, and I, don't put my money where my mouth is, if the time comes, that would mean that I was unfaithful. But the question is not whether I'm ready to do it or not. The question is, what did Jesus do? What did the apostles do? What did Stephen do? What did the early church do? What are people all over the world in other countries who are being persecuted doing? And they are following Jesus' example. And you're right. This is where the rubber meets the road. And we have to be ready to die. We have to be ready to take up our cross in all the ways Jesus calls us to. And that could mean being single for the rest of your life. If you're divorced, it could mean giving up, a massive amount of money that you've saved up for yourself. It could mean taking a massive beating voluntarily, even though you could fight back, while you pray for the person who's doing it. And it doesn't really matter, if I'm the real deal or not. What matters is, what did Jesus do and what did he say, The Orthodox have lived through this for thousands of years. The question is, have they been faithful to Jesus for thousands of years? And I think clearly not. They've not walked in his footsteps in this matter.
Yeah, and again, I think
about Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. You can go ahead.
Oh, I was just reading some of Chris's responses. About Luke 14:26, about losing all sorts of things to be his disciple. One of those things is your life. And something that was pointed out to me at one point, and I think is very poignant, is the concept that our eternal security within our relationship with Christ is a shield. Like, no matter what ends up happening, as long as we're close to Jesus, and we have that relationship birthed within a real life-giving spirit with him, at the end of the day, if we die, where are we going? We're going to heaven. We can't die. And ultimately, if we choose to save our temporal life at the cost of a fallen person's eternal life, we haven't saved much of anything. It's a priority and like a value issue. Like, what Paul was just, debating with himself, like, is it better to go now or to stay and help you guys? And like, he understood his priorities, and the concept that we would, a robber or something breaks into our house one day and starts waving a gun around, and we're willing to put some lead in him, condemn him right now straight to hell, so that we can save our temporal life, even though we know we're having eternity in heaven. That's a contradiction. Like, Paul said that he would wish that all of his, he could go to hell, that all his brethren might be saved. And, I think that's just a misunderstanding of the weight of the reality that we live in today. Like, we have eternity on the line, and yet we're willing to send people to hell right now to save our worthless fleshly existence in this horrible world. It's silly.
Yeah. That whole idea that I better make sure I get him before he gets me, so that I can keep living here on this earth, knowing that he's almost certainly going to the lake of fire, it just reveals a complete failure to understand, the heart of Jesus, why he died in the way that he did. And like, we have completely failed to get into his mindset towards the enemies that he had. And Chris
Adriaticus Scarecrow brings up Deuteronomy chapter 20, verse 1 through 4.
Yeah. Well, one thing I wanted to say before we get to some more of Adriatic's comments was, Chris said there's a time for everything, Ecclesiastes 3:1-8. And that's one of the Old Testament scriptures that people often bring up. And I think it's something that we should be ready to respond to. And one thing that occurs to me is that, this issue of non-resistance and love for enemies, this is a New Testament command. And it's different from something like adultery. Adultery has always been forbidden to the people of God, Old Testament and New Testament, although Jesus takes remarriage and puts it into the category of adultery in the New Covenant, so that we are not allowed to do that in the New Covenant as they were allowed to do it in the Old Covenant. If we remarry, we are doing the equivalent of an adulterous affair. But adultery has always been off limits, whereas going to war in certain situations or defending yourself, was allowed. But the point I want to make is that in the new covenant, Jesus forbids resisting evildoers without exception and commands love for enemies. And he makes it clear he's talking about loving action, not loving feelings. And he puts that in the Sermon on the Mount and the Sermon on the Plain. And in the Sermon on the Plain, it takes up about half of the main body of the sermon. So this is an essential teaching of Christ that is in the same category as his teachings about adultery and greed and stuff like that. And so in the new covenant, there is no more there is never a time for fighting your enemies with violence any more than we could say there's a time for adultery, or there's a time for idolatry, or there's a time for greed. There's never this is in the category of things that is off the table without exception. There's never a time for that in the new covenant. Just wanted to make that point.
Yeah, and I think when Paul in Romans is contrasting the two laws, the old law, which he compares to the law of sin, right? But then he starts bringing out this new law, which is this law of Christ, law of the Spirit. That's what he's getting at, right? That this is a law that all those old things that were under the old covenant, that were under the theocracy of Israel, under the Mosaic law, those things are no longer. He even goes on to say that it's a spiritual battle, right? That it's, Jesus says that my kingdom is not of this world, right? He even makes the point that if his kingdom was of this world, his servants would be fighting, right? He makes that contrast directly, but they're not, right? So it's
and that's this idea, like that you just pointed out. The difference between the law of Moses and the law of Christ is just something that I think a lot of Christians today, Catholic, Orthodox, Protestant, don't really think about. No. And often when you bring up some of these quite radical things that Jesus taught, the knee-jerk response is to basically run back to Moses and make a case for what he commanded, which is quite a bit less challenging. And that's like, we need to be able to make our case from Jesus, not Moses. Moses is not our teacher. David is not our teacher. Samson is not our teacher. Jesus is our teacher and example in the new covenant. And I think that, like, a lot of people intuitively know that there was a radical shift from the old covenant into the new without even having being taught that. People get that, like Adriatics, I'm sure that if you showed up to your church gathering one week, and if your the person that you call your bishop, was to hand you a knife or a gun, and if he was to ask you to go and kill some of the people who were there in the gathering because he had found out that they were engaged in idolatry and sexual immorality, and if he pointed to the passage in Exodus where God commands Moses to have the faithful Israelites take swords and slaughter the ones who had worshipped the golden calf, if he used that as a support to get you to carry out a similar action there, like you wouldn't have to think about that. You would know that, even if you couldn't articulate it, you would understand that was something that was permitted or commanded under Moses, and something has changed now that Jesus has come, given us the law of Christ, given us his example. It's completely unacceptable for us to put to death people in the spiritual community for committing acts like idolatry or sexual immorality. That's not okay in the new covenant, but you need to, like, think about what that means. Like, we've got a new teacher, we've got a new law, and he gets the last word on these things. Let's see what's going on here.
Man, Adriatic, man, come onto the thing so we can talk. That would be so cool. He was saying we didn't participate in crusades or invade and kill for killing's sake. We lose our land and have our land and cultures raped. That's probably going to get you a little mark for YouTube. I should not have said that word out loud. Which you've never felt and we defend. No, that's not the one. It was about the, we only fight defense. Oh, there it is. Why would my priest ever ask that? Orthodox only fight in defensive wars. I would argue there's no such thing. And even if it did exist, the church as a whole isn't the one who authorizes these things or lets them come to pass. Like, it's some godless, no skin in the game nation that says when we go to war and how, and the church doesn't have any involvement. That's a cop-out.
Well, I would also say those are all practical and political issues, which have really nothing to do, again, with the ethics of Jesus.
Adriatics, it's also important to note that, what Moses and the faithful Israelites did there in Exodus was not defensive. They were given a command to go and kill people who were not attacking them. They were killing them because they had committed the sin of idolatry. And if you want to argue that nothing changed from the old covenant into the new, then you got to say, well, then this would be okay for us to do in the spiritual community today. But intuitively that that's not okay now that Jesus has come. Or maybe you don't. I don't know. But I assume that you must on some level know that, like, it's not okay to do what, for example, Samuel did when he came and killed the king. I think it was the king. It was Moab, or Saul was supposed to kill all of them, but he left the Amalekites. Yeah. And so Samuel comes and finishes the job that God commanded and kills this king who's been defeated. He's unarmed. He's defenseless. Puts him to death. And that was the right thing for him to do in that situation. But hopefully that in the new covenant, that is never okay for a disciple of Jesus. Hopefully that you can agree to that.
He's saying Orthodox Church does not say anything about changed. Oh, that shifted away. We live in the new covenant. We don't kill, we defend. That is something to be understood in the Old Testament, but where do we go and find that in the New Testament? Like, I find that Isaiah chapter 2, verse 4, and Jeremiah, what is that, 23:6? No. There it is. About beating our swords into plowshares. Like, if you go and look up how the early Christians and the Ante-Nicene Fathers talk about these verses about beating our swords into plowshares and not learning war anymore, they thought that in light of Jesus's teaching in the New Testament about loving our enemies, they took that literally. They said that they literally beat their swords into plowshares, and they wouldn't be involved in any kind of military. And yes, they didn't like all the oaths and different representations of pagan gods within the military and didn't want to have anything to do with it. But they hardly talked about that compared to just understanding this new heart and this new way of living and this new way to deal with evil when they were exegeting and explaining why they weren't violent anymore. And that's a pretty consistent theme within the first 300 years of Christianity. It's hard to deal with.
Yeah, in fact, Origen directly addresses that in the against Celsus, where he contrasts that the Jews were given the right and ability to defend themselves and kill because they were essentially a theocratic nation, but that Christians were disarmed, not given their they were subject to a higher law, higher spiritual law, and then he goes into the typical that they were not to kill. In fact, they go to their death like sheep, or like to the slaughter like sheep.
One thing Adriatic said in one of his comments, yes, name one example of Orthodox doing this. I can name many Catholic examples. I think he's talking about name one example of Orthodox going on the offensive rather than fighting to defend. And one thing is, I mean, Jesus, you know, it doesn't matter if you're fighting to defend. I mean, Jesus explicitly, you know, commands us not to do that. But I mean, what about the war in Russia and Ukraine?
Right.
You know, you've got this army of Orthodox Christians who have attacked and tried to invade this other country, which is pretty much all Orthodox people, or at least most of them. So you've got these two armies of Orthodox fighting each other. One is on the offensive, one is on the defensive. And the most powerful Orthodox Christian in the world, the Patriarch of Moscow, is not pleading with them to stop and telling them, guys, we're supposed to love each other as Christ loved us. We can't slaughter each other for our earthly government. What are you doing, guys? He's passionately in favor of it. And this is, I mean, what could be a worse apostasy than that, Adriatics?
In fact, I was reading an interview from a woman who was a member of the Russian Orthodox Church, and she was speaking out against their aggression, the Russian aggression and violence against Ukraine, and they basically excommunicated her, or, you know, made her leave, so she had to go over to the Ukrainian Orthodox Church.
Yeah, I heard about that lady.
Yep.
Oh, go ahead, Braden.
I was probably about to start reading exactly what you were reading.
Okay, yeah.
Go ahead.
No, you go.
Okay, I'll just read his two comments. So if your family is being attacked, you defend them. If you as an individual is being attacked, you are to turn and not defend yourself. This is the basic understanding of the saints. Turn the other cheek applies to you as an individual. You are required to defend others if they are attacked. This is really not that complicated. How would you respond, Thomas or Chris?
You want to go first, Chris?
No, you can go first.
Yeah, I would say, you know, when Jesus says, "You have heard that it was said, do not resist evildoers, but I say to you, not sorry, you've heard that it was said, eye for eye and tooth for tooth, but I say to you, do not resist the one who's evil." That command there, do not resist the evildoer, you know, that is a command that he is giving to the community, not just to individuals. That is something he is commanding all of his disciples. And so, you know, the question I would encourage you to consider is it okay for me to do for my fellow Christian or family member what Jesus commands them not to do for themselves? And that's a big problem. You know, if Jesus' command to your wife is do not resist the evildoer, and if his command to you is do not resist the evildoer, then it seems like what he's saying is, guys, this is a command for all of you, for your community. You're to practice this as a community. You're to be as lambs, plural, among wolves. And so you and your wife have to get on the same page about this and say, hey, we are ready to die. We are ready to suffer for Jesus in whatever way he calls us to. And just as it's not right for you to deny Jesus to save your spouse or your kids, if Muslim terrorists have them at gunpoint and they tell you to renounce Jesus and become a Muslim or else your family dies. Well, you can't say, well, look, I mean, that command Jesus gave was just to individuals. And so, I'll deny him verbally and repent later. No, you can't do that. And your wife should look at you and say, don't even think about denying him. We are ready to die. In the same way, it's the same thing. There's no meaningful difference between that scenario and a scenario in which someone breaks into your house, you're tempted to grab a bat or a gun, and your wife looks at you and says, don't even think about it. Jesus commanded us to do good to our enemies, not to resist them, and we are ready to die if necessary. That's the mindset that we need to be in. Doesn't mean that we don't flee. Maybe you go out the window and avoid the person altogether, but to fight or kill them is not in the pool of options.
Yeah, if I recall, too, I believe it was not until the time of Augustine and his mentor, Ambrose, that they even addressed that you had some allowance in defending somebody else. Like, they actually addressed this, but they still forbid personal self-defense even. Like, people think Augustine was like relaxed. He was actually pretty strict on most cases of still trying to follow what Jesus's ethics was, but they did have some allowance on defending others. But prior to that, you see no quotes or any church father even addressing that issue. It was just understood that nonviolence was a blanket.
Yeah. That's a good point. And there's a guy named Preston Sprinkle who made a very interesting point in a podcast I listened to about this a couple of years ago, where he said, Augustine, he made the point you just made, that Augustine, his position, which was a novel position in his day, was that Christians can go to war only as agents of the state. But he himself did not think that it was okay to defend themselves in personal self-defense. Now, his position that there's only as agents of the state can you fight or kill, that was progressive in his day. Yeah. That was a new teaching. That was, not the conservative view of the church. But what you're saying, Adriatics, and whoever else is listening who's kind of on the same page with him, and I don't mean to attack you, I'm just trying to make the point forcefully. What you're saying is even more progressive than what Augustine was saying in his day. Even Augustine would listen to what you're saying and say that's going way too far. And the Christians who came before him would have been like, this idea that we can go to war and that we can fight in self-defense would sound to them like people today who say two guys can get married. It's like mind blown. How can you possibly say that? This is a departure from the historic conservative view of the church. Repent,
Yeah, and I think it was even radical when Augustine, he started to put pressure on like the Donatists and those groups. But even that position was something that he was really like, that was something that was a new thing, that anyone would put pressure on a group of other believers, to be part of this orthodoxy. And like, I think Augustine, unfortunately, from the, nonviolent position, started to kind of make exceptions here and there and didn't really hold the line, but that kind of opened up. And we know how influential Augustine was on Reformed theology and stuff.
Chris, Thomas, do you guys know where the thread starts to diverge in the Ante-Nicene Fathers before? Because if you look towards the first, I don't know, 280 years, I can only think of maybe one instance where there was some sort of divergence. Like some of the people who were writing in those days, I want to say it was Hippolytus, and somebody will correct me if I'm wrong. He wouldn't even baptize a soldier unless he relinquished his office.
The apostolic tradition. Yeah, I talked about that in chapter 16, I believe. The apostolic tradition says if a soldier wants to become a Christian, he's got to commit never to use the sword again, and neither can he swear. And if he's not willing to comply with this, he is to be rejected. And it says if a Christian wants to become a soldier, someone who's already baptized wants to become a soldier, he'll be sent away, for he has despised God. So that was and that's from a writing that I think the Orthodox generally consider to be, helpful and not on the level of Scripture, obviously, but something that they would point to support other things. And I don't think it's some kind of like smoking gun. There are other things that it says that are clearly crazy. Anyway, let's see here. Adriatic said, "How about y'all read the scriptures I posted?"
He's looking up Luke 3:14, Acts 10, 1-2, Romans 13:4. He's got a re-reference pretty high. I mean, it's not very high up there. It's like the 7th comment from the bottom or something right now.
All right, Luke 3:14. I think I know where he's going here. And soldiers asked him, "What is it we should do?" He told them, "Do not practice extortion. Do not falsely accuse anyone. Be satisfied with your wages." I think the point he's making is that John the Baptist never told the soldiers to leave the army. And I talked about this a little bit in the response to Jay Dyer there, that, John the Baptist was an Old Testament prophet, and he's teaching this prior to Christ giving his commands, giving the law of Christ. And this passage is silent on what are we to do under the new covenant, and it's not a passage that, tells us anything about what Jesus' disciples are to do. There's a number of things that John, would encourage his followers to do that are not obligations for us in the new covenant. And so you have to find it in Jesus. Maybe the temple cleansing might be a more powerful, passage to go to. But John the Baptist, telling soldiers who were probably living at peace in this time. This is the Pax Romana, right? So I think during this period of history, soldiers could, at times, spend all of their career without having to take up the sword. And but it's just not relevant because John the Baptist is living under the old covenant law.
At best, it's an argument from silence.
Yeah.
I've also had Christians bring up the passage where Jesus, tells the centurion.
Right.
And the centurion shows faith, and why didn't Jesus tell him to renounce his occupation as a centurion? It's like, but Jesus also has other sinners show faith, and he doesn't tell them to renounce either their sin. Does that mean that he's okay with it?
Yeah, and I think
Dines
also
with prostitutes, and
I think also the centurions of that day, people like Cornelius and this guy that Jesus had a encounter with, part of their jobs as centurion would be offering like burning incense to pagan gods, and but Jesus doesn't tell them not to do that. Obviously, that doesn't mean Jesus was okay with them continuing to do that. The passage isn't about that. That's not the point of the passage. If we want answers to questions about how are we to respond to our enemies, we have to go to the passages that actually speak to that issue. And this verse in Luke 3, and the passage about Cornelius, and the one that you just brought up, Chris, those passages are not about that.
Well, it's about showing faith, right? It's a Gentile showing faith, and other Gentiles show faith throughout the Gospels. And as you said, the point isn't, there's a lot more they need to do if they're actually going to convert to the law of Christ, right? But they're showing initial faith, but the passage isn't addressing what they actually need to do they're just showing the initial faith, right? And then they're going off and we don't know what happens to them, right? It doesn't address what happens to these people. Do they become followers? Do they fall away? Right? We don't know that. It's just.
Yeah. Are there any other verses, like one or two others? Okay. Romans 13:4. Okay, yeah. So for rulers are not a cause of fear to good conduct, but to evil. Do you wish to have no fear of authority? Then do what is good, and you will receive approval from it, for it is a servant of God for your good. But if you do evil, be afraid, for it does not bear the sword without purpose. It is the servant of God to inflict wrath on the evildoer. Either of you guys got some thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's the Roman Empire that the Christians that Paul is addressing, or the Christ believers, are living under. So those are the servants that are of God, right? In this case.
Yeah.
They're the Gentile rulers who are appointed by God to deliver justice.
Right. It's a system that God has put in place, putting the sword in the hand of earthly governments, not kingdom of God citizens, not disciples of Christ, but earthly governments, to maintain some level of order in a world that is fallen, in which most people are not loyal to Christ. And if this system was not in place, then the world would descend into chaos. And so God has a purpose in putting, the threat of the sword is there with the earthly government to keep evil in check, to keep evildoers from being able to run rampant. But there's nothing about this verse that indicates that disciples of Christ who have been transferred into his kingdom of priests are allowed to take up that sword. There's Paul. Yeah,
and not to interrupt, the other thing I'll add is very few people cite the end of chapter 12. That's Paul's essential mini Sermon on the Mount, which he's almost in lockstep with Jesus. If you read that, in fact, you could develop the Sermon on the Mount based on Paul's writing right there.
Right.
He talks about do not repay anyone evil for evil. If possible, live in peace with all, right? Do not seek revenge.
Yeah, I heard an interesting, sometimes people will quote verse 18 here, if possible, on your part, live at peace with all. Yeah. And they might sort of make the case, well, look, it says if possible.
Right. There's your exception, your out clause.
Right. And again, it's like there's nothing there that says, okay, if it's not possible, go to war against them. I mean, like Jesus lived in that, Jesus lived this principle out. He was at peace with everyone who was at peace with him. If possible, he was with peace with everyone. There were certain people who it was not possible for him to be at peace with. Does that mean that he took up the sword against them? Does that mean that he closed his fist and broke their teeth or put them in an arm bar? Of course not. You know, there's just nothing here. You know,
right. To interpret that as live peaceably, if possible, but if they don't agree to, then all bets are off and just live as.
Right.
There is a lot happening in the comment section, fellas.
Yeah.
I've been hardly able to say anything because I'm busy responding to all these different things.
Is there anything?
These people come to our lands to enslave us and kill us. And my response is, are we willing to be a righteous, holy slave and love our enemies through that slavery? Like, what are we talking about? We already know what slaves are supposed to do. What are we supposed to revolt against our Islamic or Jewish oppressors? Whoever ends up being our slave master? That's silly.
That we haven't really touched on, but the emphasis of Jesus is primarily on the next life, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not about rewards in this life. That part has to be, I think, it's all over the New Testament, right? Not storing up treasures on earth, storing up treasures in heaven. All about preaching on wealth, all about. So this whole idea that, like, and this I think centers directly on the ethics of Jesus with nonviolence. It's not this life that you're working to ensure, right? It's the next life that you're working to ensure. It's the opposite of the Old Testament in the sense of the blessings and curses were things that were going to happen in the life of the Israelite, right? If you were blessed, you would be blessed with more land, with offspring, with maybe financial gain, right? With livestock. And if you were cursed, you'd be cursed by a foreign enemy invading you and destroying your belongings and taking your wives, and those are the kind of idea in the Old Testament, but that is not at all the ethics of Jesus. He addresses none of that. It's what's going to happen in the next life and how can you secure your standing,
right? Yeah, you die now and you suffer now. We have to be willing to suffer and die today, and we have eternal life later, or we fight to protect ourselves and, you know, make sure we keep our lives in this world and make sure that we're okay now, and then we suffer and
right. He makes that point directly. What good is it for a man to gain the world, right?
So that's a principle
for the record.
Okay.
For the record, I have a wife and 2 children, and it seems like the big overarching theme is kind of appealing to this concept of protecting the innocent, and I understand that. Like, there are certain areas where I kind of get a little gray, if I'm to be really honest about it. Like, I wouldn't mind just bear hugging someone so that my family could escape in a certain circumstance or whatever. But, you know, buying a gun and putting lead in their leg is not on the table for me.
Right.
I can't imagine the idea of having to permanently maim someone so that my Christian eternally
saved family can just, live another moment in slavery or whatever the situation is. Like, there are hard times coming on us, and are we ready to be happy slaves? Like, is that really not a thing that you're considering as a Christian? That's coming, man. Are we just going to be fighting this like AR-15 war with the government of the world? Like, that's so stupid. We're going to fight missiles and AI, and like, that's crazy. What do you think you're going to do? Last another 5 more minutes so that you can eat beans and live off the grid? That's silly.
Yeah. Let's see what else we got here. Yeah, I know a number of guys, just so you know, Adriatics, I know a number of people who have large families, young kids, and they're committed to this, and these are not soft people. These are people who are not pampered. They're living in in some cases living in some pretty rough places in the world. And I know one woman who has said that if her husband were to defend her and the kids against an attacker, she would consider him a traitor to Jesus. And she really grasps this idea that, like, we need to take up our cross and lose our lives in this world.
Have you read Tortured for Christ, Thomas? Richard Wurmbrand?
I have not read that. I've seen at least most of the movie that was made about him, but probably
that movie is garbage. You need to read that book. That is a very, very good, inspiring book. There's a portion in there, and it is shown in the movie, where one of the pastors is brought in, and he's being told to rat out all his friends and give up all these different churches and communities and answer our questions about how your underground network works for spreading the gospel and stuff like that. And they tortured him and beat him and all kinds of stuff. And eventually they decided it wouldn't work, so they ended up bringing in his son, and they told him, if you do not start giving us names and locations, we are going to beat your son to death in front of you. And he wouldn't give it to him. And eventually they started beating him just like they said they would. And the father was about to give up. And he couldn't bear seeing his son being treated like that anymore. And he was ready to just tell them everything. And the son said, "Father, don't you dare. Don't you dare. Mm-hmm. I'd rather go to heaven with the name of Jesus on my lips than for my father to die a traitor." And they beat him to death. And he went back to prison. And I don't remember how that story ended, but man, Tortured for Christ is a testimony. Richard Wurmbrand was in prison in a Russian gulag for 14 years. He had to make, these people were making the Eucharist out of human feces and mocking them. It's a horrible, horrible thing that happened to them. Sorry.
That's okay. No, thank you. Something that I wanted to say, about some of the comments that are being made right now about protecting children and family members and stuff. Would you, first of all, I can completely understand the difficulty with this, and why this is so gut-wrenching and difficult to wrap the mind around. But I think it's helpful to think about that scenario that I mentioned earlier, where you've got let's say Muslim terrorists have your wife and kids at gunpoint, and you can save them. You can save them if you will only renounce Jesus and become a Muslim. And I can't see why, if you are willing to resist evildoers and kill your enemies in order to save your family, and depart from the example of Christ in that way and his teaching, why would you not be consistent and say, okay, I'm willing to deny Jesus in order to save them as well? What's the meaningful difference? You know, I know you have to make the case that Jesus didn't actually command non-resistance, but we've got his example, we've got his commands. He doesn't give us any exception to this rule of non-resistance. So, like, I'm just trying to help you get into our way of thinking about this. Like, just like there are certain things that are never okay for a disciple of Jesus to do, no matter what. It's never okay to burn incense to a pagan god. Doesn't matter if it would save other people's lives. It's never okay to do that. It's never okay to verbally deny Jesus to save myself or my family. It doesn't matter how many lives are at stake. That's never an option. It's never okay for a Christian to engage in sexually immoral behavior. Even if there was some sick person who captured you and your family, or you and a bunch of hostages, and wanted to force you into committing some kind of heinous sexual act, or else he's going to start killing hostages. It's not okay for you to engage in sexual immorality, even to save people. And what you can say to that person is, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to deny Jesus. I'm not going to engage in sexual immorality. If you are going to kill people, that's on you. That's something that you're going to have to explain to Jesus one day. But there's no situation in which I'm going to do these things. And it's the same with this. It's never acceptable to Jesus for us to try to resist evil with violence. That goes in a category of things that are off limits without exception. And if you can wrap your mind around these other things, like it's never okay to deny him, it's never okay to engage in sexual immorality, it's never okay to cop out and pray to a foreign god in order to save someone. In the same way, it's never okay to do this thing that Jesus commanded us not to do. Something else to consider is the issue of abortion. Those are being carried out on a regular basis in our country, probably not far from most of us. And these are the most vulnerable people that there are the unborn children. And we have the capacity to defend them. We have the capacity to go to the abortion clinic, wait for the doctor to come in for work, and put a bullet in him, or beat him senseless. And this would be a just cause. These are the most vulnerable people that they're going in there to destroy. But we understand, we understand as Christians that that's not the way to respond to that problem. We have to come up with a nonviolent response to the problem of abortion. And you need to get that way of thinking on this other issue as well. It's like, if someone comes to attack you or other people, should we respond? Absolutely. But it's got to be a non-violent response. It's got to be a response that's faithful to Jesus' example and teaching.
And Thomas, don't you think you just brought up faith? The gospel is based on faith, right? Faith alone, or Paul's. But don't you think that faith is often very undersold, and like faith is pretty radical, I think, in Paul's idea? And if you go to Matthew, an example of faith is not worrying about what you're going to wear or eat, right? It's that God will provide, right? And I think this plays a big role in the nonviolent attitude of Jesus, that if you have true faith, you have faith that the Lord will work things out, right? And that whatever his means are, it may not mean you survive, right? But it means, meaning you survive in the earthly sense, right? But like, it's a radical faith. It's not, and that's part of the trusting that God will provide, right? He will provide what is the right thing, rather than I'm going to defend myself and kill the evildoer before he gets me, right? I think in other words, the New Testament, and particularly Matthew, makes it clear that this faith is an all-encompassing thing that you're to put.
Yeah, man, Chris,
it's not just scripture. It's not just believing in a creed, right? Like that Jesus died according to the scriptures and rose on the third day. I think a lot of Christians that I meet, that's their idea of faith. I just believe, or I believe in the theology that I prefer, or and to me, it's radical following Jesus's ethics. It's having faith that Jesus and the Lord will provide in times of your worst times, right? In fact, have faith that you can be willing to give up your life for the next life, right?
Yeah, and I think, go ahead, Braden. Go ahead.
So I've been paying attention to Orthodox phronesis. I'll have to look that word up if that's a word. Man, I'm not trying to like complain or anything. I just think this is something that's worthy of addressing. And for anybody who's commenting, Braden is linear graphs. So this is one that sticks out, and it's really questioning our willingness to be martyrs, as that is a very high calling, martyrdom. And especially if you're taking martyrdom as Orthodox phronesis, martyrdom is one of the highest forms of being accepted in his kingdom. Do you know how many saints in humility said, I am not ready for such a crown? Yet you sit here thinking you are. And your child? And I could go back and look at others. Like, this is an issue that you actually believe you're prepared for martyrdom. And do you actually think you raised your family to be ready for this? I think you are in delusion, seriously. And I'm just going to read some more because I think this is really worthy of us to consider for ourselves. Like, are we ready? And like, is this a common calling or a high calling or something that all Christians need to be ready for at any moment? Like, I would encourage you all to visit Orthodox liturgy, assuming you are ready for martyrdom, is rooted in deep pride almost always. Every martyr prepared. Protect your children and family members. Maybe one more, and then we can kind of get into this. Like, are we ready? Are we all supposed to be ready? Is martyrdom something we should all be prepared for? And how can this be in light of love our enemies and understanding the scriptures about self-defense and, answering evil with love and, what that even means in the first place? I think it's a serious question because that's where it really, the rubber meets the road is, are we ready to die? Under like either a Jewish or Islamic suppression or some sort of fusion of the two under the Antichrist? I don't know how end times works. That's a whole different can of worms for this stream. But like, we're kind of attacked on both sides in that regard. And, and he's still, I really wish he would come up here, Orthodox phronesis. Like, we're not angry, trying to make fun of people. Like, we just want to talk, bro. We love you. We want to understand you. We want to learn. Like, we're not totally closed-minded or anything like that. We're not some highfalutin theologian or anything like that. but we love Jesus, and we see something in the scriptures that tells us that the new heart that was prophesied in the Old Testament is something that is utterly alien to the mindset of the world. Something that just doesn't click in with all the other things that, try to tell us this and that about how we should be responding to things. We're supposed to be responding to things like Jesus, I and I see your messages. I really appreciate it. God bless you too. Thank you guys for coming. Man, I really wish you would come up here so we could just talk. We're not trying to catch you in something and own the ortho bros or anything like that. We don't care about that a lick. We just want to talk. We're not going to make you some notorious person who gets hate mail in the comments or something. We just want to talk. We don't care about any of that.
Yeah, and just I appreciate what you're saying here, Orthodox phronesis.
That's hard.
Yeah, those are some very good questions that you asked us, and it is important for us to be very sober and humble about this. I mean, right now we're having, a theological discussion about these things, but I do think about sometimes, like, am I really ready? What will I really do in reality if somebody attacks me? Or I think about, a situation where there's some kind of mass shooting going on. How would I respond? I know that I can't do nothing. I have to do something, but that thing has to be consistent with Jesus' teaching and example, and that could get me killed. And I pray to God that he would give me strength and courage for whatever might lie ahead, and that, he would give me the strength to actually put these things into practice if and when the time ever comes. And it's, it's something that I need his help for. It's, it's not like I've been in situations where I've, before I started taking these things Jesus said seriously, where I thought, okay, I might get into a fight right now. And that was just a knee-jerk reaction. It was a natural, like, I thought that I was going to have to defend myself or my fiance at the time, in one case. And if something happened today, and I'm like, yeah, do I have enough faith to follow Jesus down this path and take a serious beating or worse, in obedience to what he's calling us to, and in love for the people, for the person, doing the evil, and for the people who are watching, who need that example set for them. I hope that I can put them before myself. And so, your questions and your challenges are a gut check, and they're helpful. And, I don't want us to come off like we're, oh yeah, this is easy, this is no problem, and we got this in the bag, and, we know what to do if it happens. I mean, we know intellectually, but, we have to be very sober about this, because saying it is one thing and doing it is another. And yeah.
Yeah, no, there's a lot going on, and obviously it would be a lot easier if people would just come up onto the stream and talk to us. I don't know how StreamYard works, or what the quality looks like if you join on a phone, or what you have to agree to, or what kind of sign in you have to do. It may be complicated over stuff that if you don't already have it set up. But like, we're at this place where, and there's all kinds of different ideas about how the end times works and what Revelation really means, or did it all happen, 2,000 years ago almost in 70 AD. And, you know, there's just some kind of final things where Jesus just shows up one day. Is the rapture true? Like, there's a lot of questions to ask about this, but if I just take him at his word and I look at the stuff that he was saying while he's here, like, we know that the world hates us, and they don't hate us because they hate us. They hate us because they hate him, and they see him in us. And whether we're under some sort of totalitarian AI government led by some super conglomeration of all religions, or a Jewish supremacy or an Islamic supremacy, or however that stuff works out, we have tribulation coming. That was promised to us. And our instruction in these times when we find ourselves on the raw end of the stick is to realize that we're supposed to love our enemies. And Christ didn't tell us that we have all these... Sorry, my phone keeps going off. Christ didn't tell us that we had all these different rights and things. He told us that if anybody wants to be the greatest, we're supposed to be a servant. And if we're supposed to be following him, we're supposed to have this mind of Christ formed in us, who made himself a servant. And despising the cross, you know, he set his eyes forward so that he could receive the fruit of everything that he was giving up for us. I'm not the best at memorizing and quoting scriptures and stuff. I'll end up saying things out of... Anyway, it doesn't matter. It's just, I think the world has crept into the church really early on. And I hate to say this about Ortho Bros, and, you know, there's a lot to say about church history and stuff like that. Bend over for the next Muslim you see then. Man, that is not the heart of Christ that comes out of your mouth, brother. That is not the heart of Jesus Christ in you saying that to us. That's horrible. Are you going to say that to Jesus? Did he bend over for the Jews? Did he bend over for the Romans? Did he bend over for you? Is that heart of a servant something that you hate?
Well, that's what I find most of these discussions end up not citing verses or even citing evidence. They just turn into, what would you do if this happened? And it becomes more of a challenge towards the individual stating the position of the New Testament, right? Which is a total non sequitur. It's, what is the position of the New Testament? It's irrelevant, really, like you guys were saying, whether you would follow through or not. You know, it can be analyzed from a historical position. What is the position of the early church and the New Testament writers?
Yeah.
Period. That's all that you would need to know, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what anyone would do. In fact, the person espousing the correct position could be the biggest hypocrite on the face of the earth, right? But they would still be correct.
Yeah, I think, part of the reason that the conversation on this topic, on issues of wealth, that conversation often is very, very much the same, whether you're talking to Orthodox, Catholic, or Protestant, because while they are very different theologically, and they've split, they split over very sharp theological differences, they're very much on the same page when it comes to these most challenging teachings of Christ, which is that we don't really have to take these things too seriously.
Yep.
And I think they're all three of them are very much the same in the sense that they all offer people a way to be saved that doesn't require very much of us at all. You just have to believe the right theology and be a decent person, by the expectations of the churches today, Protestant, Catholic, Orthodox, which is not a very high expectation. I mean, the people in the most powerful positions in these churches are people who, you know, like the Orthodox Patriarch of Moscow, who would be excommunicated for a variety of reasons if this were the first couple of centuries. And so, you know, it's just like, it's really, they're really not that different. They seem different, but a lot of those differences are kind of superficial in a way. And anyway, I need to end the stream, and I gotta get up for something in the morning. And this is really interesting. It's like, this is the best, most productive, you know, live stream we've had, and I appreciate you guys very much, and I appreciate you guys coming on here, Adriatics and Orthodox Phronesis, and I hope you'll come back and you know, talk about some of these things with us some more. And Devrod, my friend Devin, who's in Japan or might be in Florida right now, but anyway, he left a comment. Thoughts on peaceful resistance, for example, Rosa Parks not sitting in the back of the bus, or blacks drinking from white water fountains during Jim Crow. Very interesting question. Does that obviously at the very least, Jesus is commanding us not to use violence to resist evil, but is it okay for a Christian to resist their earthly government in this kind of way? That's a very interesting question. Yeah. Because Paul tells us to be subject to the governing authorities and, you know, to be obedient citizens. So, but when it comes to something like this, where the governing authority is doing something evil that's out of line with Christ's teachings, is it okay for us to not only refuse to do what they're telling us, but also to actively do things they tell us not to do, like a black person drinking from a white water fountain or sitting on a part of the bus they're not supposed to be in? Yeah, it's an interesting question. I certainly couldn't tell somebody like that they are violating Jesus' teachings. Although I can understand why some people would say, well, as citizens of God's kingdom, you know, we want to practice this principle of non-resistance, even in these ways. You know, I could see somebody, you know, making that argument, but I don't really have a real firm position on that. Yeah, I have to think about that some more myself. Anyway, does anybody want to have the last word? Either of you guys?
No, I think yeah, I mean, I would just say thank you guys for the discussion.
Yeah, thank you for coming on. It'd be great to have you on again sometime. Yeah. And maybe sometime we could talk about your skepticism about Christianity.
Yeah, I was saying you guys can beat up on me. That's fine.
Yeah.
We don't want to beat down people.
Yeah, well, right.
Not at all. You guys can.
Yeah, but that would be that would be an interesting thing to discuss. I've been going back and forth between theological issues and lifestyle issues, and so maybe on one of the weeks where we discuss a theological issue, we could talk about your view of you know, Matthew 24 and these prophecies Jesus made about his return, and why you don't.
Absolutely. I think that ties in very strongly with the nonviolent ethic as well. So maybe that's
okay. Well, that'd be interesting to hear you talk about. All right, I should go. Thank you so much for everybody who's been commenting, and thank you again for joining us, you guys who are Orthodox, and you know, hopefully we'll have some more discussion with you sometime soon.
Yeah, Orthodox Phoenicis, I appreciate everything you said, and I do hope you're able to come on next stream. As far as I understand, Thomas is on Mondays from 7 to 8, roughly. But that's the only kind of schedule I think he's got right at this point.
Yeah, it's been 8 p.m. Eastern time up till tonight. I did 9 p.m. because we got something going on in our church community here on Mondays that I want to make sure I can attend. So I moved it up an hour. That's all right.
And Chris, you're not off the hot seat. We're going to talk to you about why you'd affirm all these old school Christian doctrines and yet not sure about Jesus.
Yeah.
You never
All
know.
right.
Maybe you'll convert me.
We can only pray.
Or maybe you'll allow the Holy Spirit to enter me. You'll provide the means for.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you so much for coming.
All right. I appreciate you guys.
Yep.
God bless you.
Thank you.
God bless you.
Bye-bye.